Hello, everybody. I'm Red from Harvest Finance and also representing Spectra Finance. This talk is about governance beyond voting. So those of you in the wrong room, sorry, we've locked the doors, so you get to stay with us. Alrighty, so little nuance to this is generally applies to protocols that have like a quote-unquote DAO associated with them, and just talking about how we need to go beyond just the sole reliance of voting in terms of governance. So we'll kind of start off first. Oh, a little off-center there. How do we get this centered better? Let's try this. Come back here. There we go. All right, so kind of let's look over this generalization of what is a DAO. This comes directly from the Ethereum Foundation. So what are DAOs? A DAO is a collectively owned blockchain-governed organization working towards a shared mission. DAOs allow us to work with like-minded folks around the globe without trusting a benevolent leader to manage the funds or operations. There is no CEO who can spend funds on a whim or a CFO who can manipulate the books. Instead, blockchain-based rules baked in the code define how the organization works and how the funds are spent. They have built-in treasuries that no one has the authority to access without the approval of the group. Decisions are governed by proposals and voting to ensure everyone in the organization has a voice and everything happens transparently on-chain. So voting, right? Like you very see that wrapped throughout the theme of that. And there's actually two kind of takes on what are a DAO. Like when DAOs originally started, it was this idea that code is law, and everything is focused on developing that code. But since then, DAOs have like really evolved where you almost have standalone DAOs, like almost like just collectives of people not necessarily attached to a protocol, and then they're just trying to do something cool together in like this decentralized manner, right? And we have this quote from Lord Vitalik. Earlier DAOs are organized around providing infrastructure. The newer DAOs are organized around performing various tasks around a particular theme. So you can see there's definitely like these two different mindsets of what a DAO is, what a decentralized autonomous organization actually is. I think it's a little bit of a combination of both, but it's actually, in my perspective, voting is very, very secondary in what a DAO is. And again, I mentioned before, this is like very specific to like if there's a protocol and then there's like this entity associated with that protocol helping to make decisions, right? Oh, a little off center again. So going into a DAO and again talking about voting, right? So does voting mean you're a DAO? Because ultimately that seems like what everybody implies, right? Oh, we issued you a governance token. We have some code out there on the blockchain. We're a DAO. We're decentralized, right? But ultimately we know that voting is extremely flawed in the space. Concentration of votes and low overall participation means votes are often manipulated by these whales, or even by like this kind of secret behind the scenes, still very centralized group of people running operations associated with that protocol, even if they're claiming to be decentralized or there's a voting token out there. And ultimately, voting only seems to impact the protocol level. What about the rest of the organization, right? Like this DAO. Who's doing the marketing? Who's doing the treasury? Who's doing the customer service? Who's doing the project management? There are all these other things beyond just like what's happening at the protocol level. And if it's the same 5 people that launched your project that are then still making all of these decisions, it's likely they have influence over these whales. It's likely they have a big chunk of tokens that they may be voting with. So very much like voting only has a small impact on the code itself, and it doesn't have the most impact that it needs on the ultimate influence of what's going to occur around this protocol or the DAO. And the ultimate question is really, if JP Morgan said, we're going to launch our bank on the blockchain and then just hand out a bunch of governance tokens, would you call that a DAO? Would you say, yeah, they're decentralized now, right? But like, that's the rationale we're following today. Oh, if you have a token and you're decentralized, or you must be decentralized, right? Just based on that token voting. But like, I don't think anybody here or the OGs deep in crypto would really say like, oh yeah, JP Morgan's now decentralized and I'm going to trust them with my money because they gave me a token to vote on. Well, they're still pulling all the puppet strings behind the scene, right? So ultimately, I think that really expresses or solidifies the fact that like voting, as really even defined by the Ethereum organization, really isn't the crux of what these decentralized autonomous organizations are. And then you can see some quotes from people. Token Bryce, a good friend of mine: most DAOs are lacking respect for their government's participants because they lie to them, mislead them, supply them with poor quality proposals, and keep trying various kinds of shenanigans, further hindering the enthusiasm for governance. George Harrop: you still want to govern your favorite DAO when it's down 90%? Right, so we can see like participation. When markets die, we see that there's a lot less enthusiasm within the markets and within participation within these DAOs. So if you're solely reliant on voting, again, you're going to be then heavily influenced by whales or a very small population of people. And then a couple years ago, Andre Cronje said, picture your government. Now imagine if every policy had to be voted on by every citizen, and if only quorum was reached, would it pass? How does that picture look? This is a DAO. Vote no to DAOs. Again, because it's just this hyper focus on we need to vote on everything. Let's call the DAO Dowie McDowell face, right? I saw a funny article where some school was asking for them to vote what the name of the school should be. Schoolie McSchoolface was like the fourth one on the list, right? So you can see like voting isn't always the greatest thing. So now we come, let me center this again. So when I was working on revising this document and kind of seeing what other people's opinions were, I came across this 2-year-old article by Vitalik. It's on his blog. DAOs are not corporations, where decentralization and autonomous organizations matter. As a gist, beyond just vote signalers, the organization, i.e. the business operation, should also be decentralized to ensure longevity of the protocol. So in some of these snap examples that come directly from his article, again, I'd never read this before, and we've been working on this for the past 2 years with Harvest Finance and trying to organize the protocol itself through, or decentralize the protocol itself through decentralization of our community. And I was like, when I was reading this, I'm like, whoa, Vitalik talked about like this 2 years ago, and we very much followed the same path without us ever knowing he actually said this. So I'm happy to know that he agrees with us, right? Or the other way around, actually. But in some of these examples, he talked about like you have like this core, maybe it was like the initially fundraised treasury or whatever it is, but then ultimately there's what he referred to as pods, and we call these kind of like circles of influence at Harvest in a sense, or circles of responsibility. But essentially once these pods kind of say, this is what our directive is, please fund us, they receive funding, and then they receive no outside directive after that. So there's no, again, centralized core that even though funded them, they say, you need to do this, oh, you're doing this poorly, whatever. These organizations or these pods become self-sufficient, and it's within consensus within these pods. And maybe they vote on some things, but again, it's within generally consensus within these communities that make the decisions and that allow them to be decentralized, because there's not necessarily, again, directives coming from this original centralized group of people. A truly high-level autonomy for pods, where the pods accept resources from the core and are occasionally checked for alignment and competence if they want to keep getting those resources, but otherwise act entirely on their own and don't take orders from the core. Highly decentralized and diverse core governance. This does not require a governance token, but it does require broader and more diverse participation in the core. Normally, broad and diverse participation is a large tax on efficiency. But if one is satisfied, so pods are highly autonomous and the core needs to make fewer decisions. The effects of the top-level governance being less efficient become smaller. So you can see there's not really any mention of voting in there, and no governance token is required, right? So ultimately, how are these pods or these individual circles of responsibility being driven? And he speaks there a little bit about it, but it's not this idea of flat leadership, right? Like people want to think when you create a DAO or you create these organizations, there's no leader, right? And it's kind of like free fall, and it's whoever has the strongest idea. But there is leadership, but there's nobody trying to be a dictator, right? Like let's just call them like seniors in the group, right? And they try to have a more calming influence. When somebody says, yes, let's name ourselves Schoolie McSchoolface, the senior may step up and say like, whoa, okay, well, why are we trying to do this, right? Again, it doesn't necessarily require a vote for these things to happen, because like Andre Cronje said, if you have to vote for every little single thing to pass, things aren't going to actually happen. So this is actually what the harvest community looks like. So this is very generalized, but we have like these 3 circles of responsibilities, very similar to what Vitalik was referencing as pods. So we have like our DevCo. They're responsible for coding, right? And they may discuss with BizDev about the collaborations they're making. BizDev isn't giving directive to coding and saying this is how you code, this is how we expect it, but they say, hey, we've had a conversation with this group, Camelot, one of the projects that we've been working with lately. Can we spin this up? Is this feasible? Can we do these things, right? And so you can see feasibility is the big thing between BizDev and coding. You can see with socials, this is generally what people think is community, your Discord group, your Twitter accounts, marketing, whatever. Again, working with those collabs of the people outside of your group and looking for those things that your community wants to be a part of. And then socials, working with coding, like the UX, branding, the feel and look. Again, all of these 3 groups are running independently of each other. They don't need to vote on what they're doing because they have some of these senior guiders helping them along the way. And then you can see how these interactions between them work to facilitate this decentralized community. No voting, no token, there's no central core leader guy. If one of us gets hit by a bus, somebody else is kind of in their place to take this over. That is true decentralization. That is truly making decentralized decisions without voting, without some whale coming and applying and having influence. And every section of Harvest is filled with community members. So we no longer have the same 3 core people who develop the protocol running things end to end. We now have this group of 20 plus people within each of these kind of pods or areas of influence that are helping make these decisions and truly making the product decentralized in terms of a DAO. So kind of to reiterate, so daily operations managed by your community includes them in every facet of the organization decision-making process, eliminating the centralization of decisions without the over-reliance on voting. Prices crash, contributors actually work harder as opposed to voting less, right? Like you're like, oh, things are going down, people are losing kind of interest. What can we do to kind of get things rallied up, right? Like you have actually a lot more participation as opposed to the other. Now, don't get me wrong, voting is still important, right? I'm not crushing on voting. Voting is very important when you're talking about like the protocol level, right? But we seem to think about like voting or the way like even the Ethereum Foundation is like the savior of all. Been plenty of people who've stolen from DAOs or have done manipulative stuff, passed kind of goofy votes to make that happen. And so that's why it's very important, in my opinion, that we are very more focused on how we are building our communities, utilizing those people instead of just this over-reliance on, here, I have a token, let me vote, but ultimately I'm going to get overwhelmed by some whale. There was actually an example of an attorney I was talking to recently, specifically quoted by the SEC. There was a vote on a major project that they're looking at. 250,000 votes were cast. 240,000 came from one entity, right? Is that like decentralization? Like again, that's what's going to happen if JP Morgan spins up like a bank on the blockchain and they're just going to overwhelmingly push out any of these other smaller fish voters and ultimately pass what they're going to want to pass. And again, that's what we're doing currently as a crypto ecosystem. We're just saying, yes, yes, governance, tokens, voting, we're decentralized. And I'm trying to stress here, ultimately, that is not the end-all, be-all. So a little bit, again, about Harvest Finance. We've been working on this. They were started by Anon devs back in August 2020, back in DeFi summer when things were going crazy, Pasta Coin, all these crazy yield farms coming together. But unfortunately, like DeFi, along with all of the rest of crypto, is very fragmented, right? Like if you want to find all these yield farms, you have to go to 100 different websites. You have to deposit with all these websites. You have to yield farm with them and wait time, and hope you don't get rug pulled. Harvest Finance is actually a yield farming aggregator, so it tries to list all the best yields all in the same place. You can easily deposit with like Zaps, one click into any position, and then jump right back out. You can see this is like V1 of Harvest when we first launched, very degen. And now strictly through community builders, what we call yeomen, our biz devs, community managers, our artisans, our artists, We came up with Harvest V3 within just like the past week, and obviously you can see it's a huge difference from the V1 that was originally launched by the centralized group. Again, 100% developed and delivered by our community, right? And you can see that is actually powerful. And in my mind, we represent, based on this system that we're setting up, like what, in essence, people think of a DAO, like a commune in a sense. Everybody coming together, working on this farmland to grow these resources that the greater community wants. And then the other project I represent, and one of the ones I'm actually really excited about, formerly AP Wine Finance. They renamed to Spectra Finance because everybody thought we were wine on the blockchain, so we had renamed it a little bit. But essentially, this is a futures marketplace. So with yield farming, these are interest-bearing tokens. So in theory, you have theoretical value. If I deposit something somewhere and I'm getting a 10% rate of return, well, I have a theoretical value over the next year of this 10%. But it's locked, like a farmer growing crops. Those strawberries are still growing, and I can't sell them yet. But that plot of land, knowing it's going to have 10,000 strawberries coming out of it, again, has theoretical value. So at Spectra Finance, you can essentially bring these interest-bearing tokens to Spectra and get like a cash advance up to a year on that theoretical yield, essentially creating a yield marketplace where I can swap my Harvest Finance interest tokens for some Web3 gaming tokens and essentially unify the very fractured crypto space. Because right now, DeFi people don't necessarily NFT, or like Web3 people don't necessarily DeFi. And so like there's these people all over the place, and they don't know about like all of the different aspects within their crypto. They're very siloed into their space. But there are interest-bearing NFTs, like in Web3 gaming. You might have the Crystal Sword of Destiny. That's the rarest thing out there, but it is interest-bearing, or it's like play to earn, so it does have, it's stakeable and you can collect things from it. Well, what if this 16-year-old kid, he never wants to sell it, right? But he does need money to move out of his house, go out with his girlfriend or whatever. He could actually bring his interest-bearing Sword of Destiny to Spectra Finance and take an advance on that yield from 3 to 6 months out or a year out and have money in his pocket without ever having to sell that very rare asset, right? And then now that person in Web3 gaming, he comes here and he's like, whoa, look at all these other interest-bearing assets that I could get into. We have like DeFi, and whoa, this 20% rate of return on, stable coins. Or he's looking and sees Realty has property on the blockchain that's collecting rent and putting it on the blockchain. Well, now I can become a property investor and swap my Sword of Destiny yield for real income from a property. And you can do that easily, again, without selling that sword, without selling that property. You're only selling that futurized yield. So as you can see, now within one unified marketplace, users don't have to visit 100 different places individually to participate in yield. And now you have Web3 gamers coming to the same place as NFTers, as DeFiers, as traditional world assets, all in one marketplace. And somebody I was talking to when we were boothing earlier, they do real world loans on the blockchain, but they spin up an NFT that is the one that's collecting the interest from the borrower, right? And so if you think about this, I asked them, well, what do your customers do if they need money? They're locked up in your NFT. What do? They're not going to be your customer anymore because they need to sell your NFT to gain liquidity. Every project, like yourself, should ultimately be communicating with a Spectra Finance to say, hey, never sell your asset. If you need some kind of liquidity, you can just bring it here and take an advance on that yield. And now they maintain their customer relationship with you. They have a little bit of liquidity in their pocket, and these aren't permanently locked up. If they ever regain that liquidity that they borrowed, they can simply just unlock their asset, right? So Spectra Finance not only provides this marketplace where everybody can easily swap at various different interest rates and yields, it unifies the space and brings everybody together. So they're telling me I'm out of time. I didn't realize I want to speak so much. So ultimately, I just want to point out to everybody, voting, smoke and mirrors. If you're thinking about participating in a DAO, you're in a DAO today, ask yourself, is this organization that I'm a part of that's associated with blockchain, are they simply calling themselves decentralized because they've given you a token and they can cast a vote that can be easily manipulated? Or is every asset of their organizational structure actually utilizing community members like myself to fulfill these key roles and actually make that organization decentralized so decisions that are made either at the voting level or at the consensus level are truly from the people and not just one guy with a giant bag of tokens? Thank you.